Hello and welcome again everyone, this is Mike here and the channel is called Social Rockstars, and in this channel I focus on social skills, improving them. I'm giving you tips and tricks on how to better your social life and your professional life. So if you're interested in learning more about that, smash that subscribe button down below and let's get right into the video. So today I want to talk to you about some common communication barriers and how to overcome them. Now there's different forms of communication, non-verbal, verbal, interpersonal, etc, etc. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in the video. However, for the purposes of explaining the communication barriers, what I'm going to be focusing today is on verbal communication. So what do I mean by verbal communication? And it's pretty straightforward. Verbal communication relies on words that we use to convey a message to the other party, and it's our standard method of communicating on a day-to-day basis. I mean, what else can I tell you apart from that? We've learned that since infancy, and this is our main way of communicating thoughts, expressing emotion, etc, etc. So there's a few types of verbal communication, and one of them is interpersonal communication. Now those are the thoughts and conversations that you have with yourself on a day-to-day basis, which are very private and they're normally restricted to ourselves only. However, if we decide to convey that information to other people, we can, or we can keep it confined in our own minds. Now the next type of communication is interpersonal communication. That's normally when you're speaking with one other person. That can be a friend, a family member, a colleague, or anyone that you're encountering on your path to improving your social skills. Now, next up we have small group communication. That consists of a group of people, two or more, in which everyone takes turns to convey information to the other side. That can get very chaotic and it can get very confusing the more participants there are, because there's always something going on. I mean, you've sat down in a group of people, there's always someone saying something, another person saying something else, and it's very hard to keep track on the main idea that the conversation is supposed to convey, and it's also very difficult to follow all leads that go from that conversation. And finally, you've got public speaking, which normally consists of one person that conveys a message to a big group of people. Normally it's a very one-sided conversation. It's the public speaker conveying information to the audience. However, they can break that up by asking questions at the end or interacting with the public, but it's generally very one-sided, conveying the message from one person to an audience. And now that we've got the common types of verbal communication, I want to dig deeper into what are the barriers for that verbal communication. And a really easy, straightforward example for you to understand is if you've ever played Broken Telephone on Chinese Whispers as a kid, you definitely know what I'm talking about. Now, for those of you who don't know, that's a game where one kid tells the other one something, whispering in their ear, and then the other one goes and whispers into the ear of the other child, and so on and so forth. They continue in a line, and by the end of it, whatever the first child said is completely different from what the end child heard. And this is a classic example of how we interpret information, how we process information, and how we convey that information to other people. And the biggest challenge for you and the biggest success that you can have in communicating is managing to reproduce that information as closely as possible as how you got conveyed it in the first place. So generally what that means is being able to communicate your thoughts clearly and having a productive conversation in which both sides are listening and responding in a very coherent way. So some common barriers that occur in our day-to-day communication can be the use of jargon, specialized words that are particular for your environment, whether that's slang, whether that's technical language. In general, it's just overcomplicated words that make a lot of sense for a certain group of people. However, if you're not communicating with that same group of people or a representative of that group of people, then the other person might understand that information in a completely different way, something that you don't want. Now, another one would be some emotional barriers and taboos that the other party might be having, whether that's a topic that they're uncomfortable talking about or whether that's a topic that isn't acceptable to discuss in the relationship that you have. Maybe it's not a really close friend, maybe it's just an acquaintance. You really need to match that to the correct audience that you're telling the information to. Now, another one, which is a personal pet peeve of mine, and if you've seen some of my earlier videos, you're gonna know about it, is the lack of attention, the lack of interest, distractions that the other party might be having, or general disinterest in what you have to say.
Stare into my soul, and I'll stare into yours.
Maggie, does...
Hey, shh. There's no talking, and don't look away. Stare into my soul.
You are not...
Shh, there's no talking.
Babe, I'm not staring...
Me and you, stay with me. I'm your wife.
You are not my wife.
So what do I mean by that is when you're talking to someone and you're super into the conversation, I don't know, you're telling them about quantum physics. This is also gonna fall into the territory of using overcomplicated language, but regardless of that, and the person that you're telling this to whips out their phone and starts scrolling Facebook. You know, this is what I'm trying to say. It's irrelevant to them. It's disinteresting to them, and you're not conveying any information, and it builds up frustration in you as well. Another big barrier would be the difference in viewpoints and perception. If you've ever had a conversation with someone about politics that doesn't agree with you, you definitely know what I mean there. No matter how hard you try, they seem very convinced in their own theory and you seem very convinced in your one. And the conversation really hits a brick wall. I mean, there's no way to convince them in something else. They're not listening and you're not listening to them. So if you encounter that barrier, then you really need to work on that to overcome it.
I am done! I don't deserve this. I really do not deserve this. I deserve somebody who gives a shit. I'm not spending one more second of this life with some inconsiderate prick.
Language differences in different accents are also a communication barrier that can present itself to you. Whether that's someone that doesn't really speak that well the language that you're communicating in, or someone that has a very hard to understand accent, it can get very difficult in terms of pronunciation, understanding the information, so you really have to make sure that you're understanding the information correctly. Also, false assumptions can lead to a communication barrier, so expectations or prejudices. That's when someone automatically expects that they know what you're going to say before you say it. Classic example of that would be communicating with your parents or communicating with someone close to your family. You've spent so much time talking and conveying information, and you know each other so well that sometimes they might think they know what you're gonna say even before you finished your thought. That also ties to people hearing what they want to hear rather than what you're telling them. And great, we figured out most of the common communication barriers. Now what? Well, it's very important to be aware of those barriers and know their implications. As a skilled communicator, your job would be to overcome them or reduce their impact on your conversations and on the way you convey information. And fear not, I've got the ultimate solution for you to resolve that issue, which is active listening. Now I'm gonna repeat it again, active listening. You wanna fully concentrate on what the other person is saying. That means focus on what they're saying, focus on the information they're trying to give you, and look for clues as to what your next step would be, whether that's going to be asking a question, whether that's going to be making a statement, but you really need to focus on the information they're conveying. Now, you want to process the information that they're giving you as thoroughly as possible, and you also want to be seen to be engaged. What do I mean by that? You don't want to be looking out the window or just daydreaming somewhere while that other person is telling you something. You want to be present, you want to be making eye contact, you want to be nodding at appropriate times, and you want to be avoiding any distractions. So if you're seen to be engaged, the speaker will be feeling more at ease and they'll be conveying more information to you. They will tell you more and they'll also share more with you. Now think about a therapist. They do exactly those things. They actively listen and engage with you at the appropriate times. They don't distract themselves. That makes you share more and that makes you say more, which essentially builds a stronger relationship and benefits you and them.
Because it's difficult to go through a very private struggle publicly.
I heard what you think. But you know what I'm really interested in is hearing about how you feel.
You also want to reflect on what the speaker is saying by asking a clarifying question. Also, if you're actively listening and if you're interested in what they're saying, then you're bound to have questions, and that really helps get the conversation flowing. Another thing that you can do is you can paraphrase what they're saying, which means that you're using slightly different words to say the exact same thing and convey the idea to the speaker. Then a great tool to have and to use is using simple language. Match the tone of the conversation to your audience. Now, if it's some co-workers, you can use technical terms, you can use technical knowledge. However, if it's a normal group of people that are not very familiar with what you're talking about, then you want to simplify it as much as you can. I'm a big fan of the idea of, if you can't explain this to a 10-year-old, then you need to simplify your language. People will often not admit to not knowing what you're talking about because that makes them look unprepared and it makes them look bad. So make sure to pause occasionally and ask them questions. Make sure everyone is on the same page and they're following through your thoughts the way you want them to follow. And then finally, it's important to give feedback. Just as it takes two to tango, it takes two to have a conversation, at least. And make sure that all the feedback that you're providing is constructive, even if it's negative in nature. Because you should be aiming to strengthen your capabilities and the capabilities of the person sitting opposite you. And just as a general example of those strengthened communications, I'll give you, again, your family, your close friends. Sometimes you can have a conversation with them and it seems like you're reading each other's minds. That's because you've got a very strong communication set up. And this can be the outcome of many relationships if you decide to overcome those barriers and put in the work in the conversation. So that's the video on the communication barriers, guys, and thanks for watching. Sometimes the biggest problems that we could be facing can be resolved by just sitting down and talking through them. And as social beings, we need to work around those communication barriers and work together to overcome them, because we want to improve our lives and the lives around us. If you like the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment down below the way you overcome those communication barriers. And if you have any tips that I haven't mentioned in this video. See ya!